I caught most of the effort against Colorado State. Oregon State put up a lot of points in the first half and then got completely drubbed in the second half, 58-27. So obviously the defense, as you just mentioned and explained, was abysmal in that game as well. The offense got off to a quick start, put up big plays as you would expect a Pac-12 offense against a Mountain West defense, but looked awful in the second half. Jake Luton, the quarterback, already has 4 interceptions on the season, and Minnesota actually may see Daryl Garrettson, the quarterback that they faced at home against Oregon State last year. But looking at Minnesota's defense, how did you feel against Buffalo and the possible effort coming up against Oregon State?
Sure. Let's start with the effort against Buffalo. I thought that the running game, in terms of stopping it, went a lot better than I expected. Again, Rob Smith, first year at Minnesota. Again, his run defenses at Arkansas hadn't looked particularly great. And so you see the first effort that they're able to put on the field and put on tape against Buffalo, 22 carries for 51 yards. That's pretty good. It's 2.3 yards a carry. And then you look at what Minnesota did in the second half to stifle the Bulls, 6 carries for 3 yards. And then they just completely abandoned the run in a close game. This isn't like game script took it away from Buffalo. They just chose to go away from it because Minnesota's front seven, Steven Richardson, Merrick Jackson, Jonathan Celestine, and Thomas Barber, were able to create havoc, create penetration, and create lanes for everybody to fill through and make sure that the longest yardage gain on the ground for Buffalo on last Thursday was 7 yards. So Minnesota did a very good job there. I also thought that the passing defense was better than expected as well. Minnesota had 2 plays where I thought Buffalo quarterback Tyree Jackson really kind of just put the ball in a spot that neither Gopher defensive back was going to make the play unless they really turned their head and found the ball. Hindsight is 20/20. Should they have turned their head and found the ball? Absolutely. But this is 2 guys that, especially on the long 60-yard pass play, Keandre Thomas in his first game was right on the hip pocket of the wide receiver. Tyree Jackson just made a better throw. And then in the next play, Tyree Jackson places the ball into a very tight spot where only the receiver can make it if the defensive back's not going to be able to turn his head. So I was pleasantly surprised with how Shenault played. I thought that he was Minnesota's leading tackler. I thought he should have been credited with more passes broken up. I thought that he played pretty well. Keandre Thomas in his first start, I thought he played pretty well as well. And then the guy we obviously have to talk about in the secondary is Antoine Winfield Jr. The man did literally everything from defense to special teams for Minnesota, second on the team in tackles, a sack, a tackle for loss. He even blocked a field goal. So he was everywhere, and he had one of the best in terms of recoveries I've seen from a secondary player on a flea flicker. He was 12 yards behind the play. He somehow times it up, sprints, doesn't get PI, doesn't get a touchdown thrown on him, gets his right arm in there, breaks it up. I mean, he is going to be a fantastic player for Minnesota. And then when you look forward and look at this Oregon State team, you mentioned Jake Luton, 3 to 4 touchdown to interception ratio. So 4 turnovers in terms of in the passing game against a Colorado State team and a Portland State team that aren't quite probably going to be up to the caliber of defense that Minnesota is. The game plan for Minnesota, and from talking with the Oregon State beat writer, specifically Angie Machado from our Scout.com family, is Oregon State's going to want to run the ball to set up the pass. So if they're not going to be able to run the ball, which Oregon State's actually had a lot of success running the ball through 2 games. They're averaging 5 yards a carry. The issue is game script has taken it away from them. So if Minnesota's able to shut down the run and make sure that Jake Luton has to, throw the ball through the air, and some of this is going to come down to Minnesota's offense as well. If the offense is able to put points on the board early in the first quarter, and with a couple minutes left, it's 14-0. Well, if you're Oregon State, you can't exactly try to establish the run too much longer, or else you're going to get caught in being only a throw-only mode. So Minnesota's defense is actually needs some help from their offense if they're going to help things with the game script. But if Minnesota's defense, especially against the run in Game 1, was any indication, I think Gopher fans are going to be pretty surprised and pretty happy with the way things should go against the Beavers.
On the surface, considering we've got a mid-tier Big Ten team, if not a little bit better than that, taking on an Oregon State team that did win 5 games surprisingly last year, but I think that speaks more to it being an off year in the Pac-12. So Oregon State shows us in the first 2 weeks this season against 2 teams from the group of 5 in FCS that it's going to struggle for victories this year. That you would think Minnesota would pull it together and have a convincing win in this one, but the point spread's pretty close. It's about a field goal, and just knowing how Minnesota plays and the offensive struggles, starting with the offensive line that was shown last week, going all the way out to the West Coast. Plus, on top of that, we did see the 2 teams play at Minnesota last year, and the Gophers were a much better team overall, but it was a pretty close game, that I would expect some kind of 23-20 Minnesota decision in this one.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different factors that are going to play into this game. We have the 9 p.m. kickoff for a Gopher team that, again, Pac-12 after dark. Not a lot of people see these games. Minnesota having a 6 p.m. kickoff in their first game, I think, helps. But even still, that's very late for Minnesota. Then we also have the air quality aspect coming into it for all the different wildfires that are going on out west. You know, games such as Oregon, Nebraska, plus Minnesota, Oregon State are going to be impacted. They got some rain and some wind last night, so things look good. But even still, it's going to come down to really, how does Minnesota's offensive line dictate this game? Because if they're not able to get much push at all, if the running game is going to stall, then I understand why the point spread is -2 in terms of Oregon State being a favorite. But if Minnesota's running game, and if Kirk Sherrock is able to game plan some things and be creative with how he gets touches to his running backs in space, I mean, this game should be at least a 7 to 10 point victory for Minnesota in my eyes. Again, Minnesota's strengths match up with Oregon State's weaknesses. Oregon State isn't a very good running team in terms of stopping it, and Minnesota, in theory, should be a pretty good running team. Then Oregon State wants to establish to run to pass the ball. Well, Minnesota's strength is stopping the run, and their weaknesses in the secondary, more or less. So I think that if things set up well in terms of Minnesota getting off to a hot start, which they should be able to do, again, this is an Oregon State front seven that hasn't looked very good at all through 2 games. But in that same respect, I mean, some kind of respect has to be paid to Gary Anderson in year 3. They are at home. They've been getting ridiculed all week by the media. I'm sure the coaches have been in their ears, but in that same respect, Minnesota's coaches have to, be establishing to their players, this is a game we can absolutely win. So when I look at this game, I think both running backs get over 100 yards. Minnesota gets over 200 yards total, and the defense does just enough where I think Minnesota emerges with a victory, 31-24 in Corvallis.
Ryan Burns from Gopher Illustrated. You can obviously hear the exceptional information and insight into Minnesota football as the Gophers travel west to take on Oregon State this week, a team that they defeated, I believe, 30-23 last year en route to a 9-4 campaign. Ryan, we appreciate you stopping by and enjoy the information and insight.
Sounds good. Talk soon, Mark.